It is officially autumn season. I am so excited. I wore a jumper for the first time yesterday, and then I woke up today and I'm wearing another jumper because it's actually really chilly in this house, and with the rising gas prices, we ain't turning on that central heating for many, many weeks. Maybe all winter if we can help it. I'm just so excited for this season. It's my favourite time of year. All the trees are starting to turn orange and I'm just so full of autumn Halloween happiness. But I figured, seeing as it is the Halloween spooky season, I would share with you 10 murder mystery books that I think everyone should read if you're into that kind of thing. If you've watched literally any of my book videos before, you probably know that I am very much into just two genres, and they are sapphic romance and then psychological thrillers. But like within the genre of psychological thriller, I really, really love a classic murder mystery. Think like Agatha Christie style, but for the modern day. That's the kind of book that is really like my bread and butter. So it was really hard to narrow down just 10 murder mysteries I wanted to recommend, but you know what, I can always do a part 2, and here is my list. The first book I want to mention to you is The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. I love this book, there's no surprises there. This actually holds like a really special place in my heart because this is one of the first books I read when I first got back into reading. I've always been a massive bookworm, like throughout my childhood years, my teenage years, I read so much. But then life got in the way, I did my A-levels, I got my first full-time job, and reading just kind of took a back seat. And when I sort of decided that I wanted to get back into reading, The Hunting Party was one of the first ones I read, and I loved it so much, and I've just continued reading for the last like 5 years since then. I actually don't have like the physical copies of a lot of these books to show you because when I first moved out of my flat that I shared with my sister into my even smaller flat that I shared with my girlfriend, I had to get rid of loads of books because I simply just didn't have the space for them, and now I regret everything. But you know what, I'm building up my collection from like scratch again, and it's quite satisfying. Anyway, The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. This is a really, really classic murder mystery. So you've got this group of friends, of course, they're all very different, they're all from like different walks of life. You've got like the party girl and the long-term couple with the kid, and I'm pretty sure you've got a gay character in it, a gay guy. Don't quote me on that though, I don't have the book to flick through and read and find out. So all these friends from different areas of life, and they come together for this New Year's party that they are holding in this essentially cabin in the woods. If I remember correctly, it's not actually a cabin, it's a big old like mansion in the woods, but the premise stands, it's the same kind of thing. So you're deep in the woods in the Scottish Highlands, it's the middle of winter, it's obviously New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, very atmospheric, very dark, very chilly. And then on New Year's Day, one of the characters turns up dead, except you don't know for a huge bulk of the book who the character is that has died, nor do you know who's responsible for the murder, because of course this is like your typical locked in mystery. It has to be one of the characters who are in this mansion, in this house. Each chapter is from a different character's point of view, and it like really slowly guides you through the story, and it gives you like little hints of motive from each character, like why each character might have a certain problem with a different character. But of course, like it sort of like alludes all of these sort of feuds between the characters, but you don't actually know who the character is who's dead, so you don't know if that's relevant or not until much later in the story. It just very slowly guides you through the story. It sort of gives you alibis and motives as you go through, and it's really, really fun to read. You literally do feel like a detective. You feel like it is very Agatha Christie as you, the reader, try to piece together what exactly happened, and you can put in all your best guess and you probably wouldn't get it. So of course, because I love The Hunting Party so much, when Lucy Foley also came out with the guest list, I read this one as well. This one, a lot of people say they prefer this one to The Hunting Party. I think I actually prefer The Hunting Party, but like I said, it does hold a really special place in my heart. But this is a very similar premise, but instead of a cabin in the woods, it's a wedding on a remote island in Ireland. Ireland in Ireland. I do see why people enjoy this one more. It's a lot tighter than The Hunting Party. I feel like Lucy Foley like really got into her groove when it came to writing this book. Like there's less sort of like fuss and less faff around like getting to the point. It's just very succinct. I found this one, but like I said, I do prefer The Hunting Party just because it is special to me. This is a wedding party essentially. So again, it's every chapter is from a different character's point of view. You've got the bride, you've got the groom, you've got the bride's sister. My phone is ringing. Wait a second. Hello. Hello. Where was I? Guest list, wedding, remote island. Again, very atmospheric. It's very like stormy and dark, and it's such a cliche, but it just works so well. Like when you're reading a murder mystery, like an island in the middle of the sea where it's all stormy and dark, like that's what you want, isn't it? That's what you're looking for. So it's the wedding day, and I think it's shortly after the wedding, in like during the reception, a body is found, and once again you don't know whose body it is, nor do you know who the one responsible for the murder is, but it has to be somebody on this island. You've got the handsome groom, the beautiful bride, the sister who's clearly hiding a secret. You've got the wedding planner, or like the person who like owns this wedding venue, who's ever so slightly off, like something's off with her, but you don't really know what. And I think there's some other point of views as well, but like you've got this big, broad cast of characters once again, and you don't really know how they're all like intertwining. Like you know they obviously all know each other, but their stories intertwine at points, but you're not really sure how or why. It's just really, really good. So I'm just reading my notes to make sure I don't miss anything. It's very fast paced. It's told over the course of a weekend. You can bash this out in one evening. I know it looks chunky, but it is such a fast read. It is so good. Oh, also, like, every chapter of this ends on a cliffhanger. Like, every single one. Like, you can't put it down. It's impossible. You just read until it's done, and that's it. Next up, we have Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn, and I, for the life of me, cannot find this book on my shelves. I'm just scanning them again now to make sure I haven't missed it. But no, it's definitely not there. And I can't remember lending it to a friend, but I must have done. So if you're my friend and you currently have my Sharp Objects book, please just let me know, because I don't know where she's gone. Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn is by the same writer who did Gone Girl, so if you like Gone Girl, you will probably like this one. It's a lot darker, a lot more disturbing than The Hunting Party and The Guest List, which, like I said, are very like Agatha Christie-esque. Sharp Objects is just downright disturbing. Again, it's very atmospheric, but not in like a spooky way. It's just like, it gives you chills. It gives you actual goosebumps. It is a lot darker. Like, I would genuinely be a bit worried for Gillian Flynn. Like, if this is how her mind works, if these are the kind of books that she writes, like, I'm concerned for her. Like, is she okay? Like, it makes for an incredible book, but, like, her mind, it's just very uncomfortable. So Sharp Objects is about this journalist who moved away from her little hometown. I think it was in Missouri, a town called Wind Gap. And it was just this really sort of classic small town. Everyone knows everyone, but there's like this like dark undercurrent to it. And the main character, whose name I can't remember, she moves away from the hometown, but she's a journalist, and her boss tells her she's to go back and write about this murder that's happened in her hometown, this unsolved murder. So she travels back and she moves back into her mum's home, and her mum it's just a very unhealthy relationship. Like, her mum has clearly got some like very intense mental health issues. And she also meets her younger sister Amma, who's only 13 for the first time. And Amma is very manipulative. She very much knows how to get what she wants out of her mum, out of anyone in this town. She's very overly sexualised for a 13-year-old. And again, I've said many times, just very dark, very dark. But of course, the main character, what is her name? I'm going to look it up on Goodreads right now because I can't just keep calling her the main character and it's going to really annoy me. Camille, that's her name, of course it is. So Camille is obviously a journalist reporting on this unsolved murder, and then while she's back in her hometown, there is another unsolved murder of another teenage girl. And Camille, the journalist, is researching this. She's looking really, really deep into this for her article. She wants to find out what's happening to these girls, and in the process of doing so, she does find out what's happening to these girls. And the twist at the end of this is so good. Gillian Flynn is a really talented description writer. Like, she writes descriptions so well. You literally feel like you are there living in this moment with the characters. She makes it feel so real. And she also, in this book, really focuses in on just women, like the good, the bad, the ugly, the relationships between women to women. It's just so good. And it's definitely not a classic murder mystery, but it is a fantastic murder mystery nonetheless. Next up, I want to talk about The Maidens by Michaelides. This is one of my most recent reads, and I enjoyed it so much more than I thought I would. This is a murder mystery set against the backdrop of like dark academia. It's set at Cambridge University here in the UK. It really has a big theme of like Greek mythology running throughout it, and that, like, on its surface doesn't sound like something I would particularly enjoy myself. but this was thrilling, like heart in your throat, like goosebumps kind of murder mystery writing. It was really, really enjoyable. So you've kind of got two separate storylines running parallel in this, but also they're very related storylines. So the main character here is Mariana, who lost her husband really tragically. She had this wonderful relationship with her husband, and he sadly drowned whilst they were on holiday in Greece. And then Mariana's come back home from Greece. She lives in London, and she's just trying to like work through her trauma and her grief of that. She's also a therapist herself. And then her niece's best friend, Zoe, is also found murdered, or is also found dead, but Zoe's been murdered. And Mariana goes to Cambridge University, which is her old alumni, and she decides to research it for herself, and she gets really, really obsessed with the idea that this professor, Edward Foster, is the one who's committed this murder, and she is literally like a one-track mind. It's him, and I'm going to prove it. And that is not a spoiler, that is literally what it says on the very first page, first chapter of this novel. And it's about Mariana unravelling the story whilst being so one-minded about who did this and why he did it. And whilst this does set up your main suspect on the very first page of this book, it still somehow manages to keep you guessing, which I think is a really incredible feat. Alex Michaelides also wrote The Silent Patient, which is another like viral book. Everyone loved that book. And I actually preferred this to The Silent Patient. So if you like The Silent Patient, or if you didn't even like The Silent Patient, they're very different, but they're still sort of like very intricate murder mysteries. I would highly recommend this. Like I said, there are a lot of references in this to Greek mythology. There's a lot of like parallels made between like the Greek gods and like Greek mythology stories and the main characters. If you're into that kind of thing, I think you'll sort of find extra layers in the story. I'm not super into Greek mythology. Like I like it on like a surface level, but I've never really like dove deep into learning about it all. But if you are really into it, I think you'll find extra layers in this book that I would never have picked up on in my life. I just thought this was really, really clever writing. It's really intellectual writing as well, but it doesn't make you feel stupid if you don't understand, which I think is quite a feat. There's nothing worse in the book than makes you feel stupid as a reader. One thing I will say is I found a lot of the characters in this just talk in circles. Like there's a lot of speech, but nothing actually means anything, which I found quite frustrating at points, but I suppose you have got to bulk out a book like this somehow. Oh, and also I do kind of struggle with Alex Michaelides' depiction of women in this book. I can't remember if I had the same criticism of The Silent Patient, but he writes them like very one-dimensional, and they're kind of there at some points just as like sexual objects, which I did struggle with. Not enough to make me hate the book, like I've definitely read worse in my time, but maybe something to bear in mind. You didn't think I was going to do a video about murder mysteries without mentioning One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus. I love this book. Full disclosure, I got sent the first two Karen McManus books, so One of Us is Lying and Two Can Keep a Secret, I think. I got sent them as part of like a PR thing. I did an ad with them many, many years ago. But you know how many times I've mentioned Karen McManus since then. I've read all of her books. She's actually got a new one which I haven't read, so I lied, but I'm going to order it. I'm going to read it. These are YA murder mysteries. If you have never read a murder mystery before and you're worried it's going to be too dark, you just want to like dip your toe in, One of Us is Lying is a really, really good way to do so. So the plot of this is simple. 5 teenagers in detention, and one of them suddenly dies, and it comes out that he was murdered. And of course, again, another locked room mystery. The one responsible had to be in the room. So this book follows the different point of views of all 4 characters. Again, very different. It's very like Breakfast Club. You've got like the nerd and the jock and like the popular girl and the cheerleader, and I can't remember, but like you've got all the different sort of like types of school people, all the cliches. And you're following each person's point of view as they are all trying to figure out individually who killed Simon. I'm sure his name's Simon. That might be wrong, but I'm 99% sure it was. I watched the TV series on Netflix very recently. If you have watched the TV series on Netflix, I would recommend reading the book as well, because the book actually ends differently, as far as I can remember. So it's worth reading. Yeah, it's just a really easy, digestible mystery to read. I just love a murder mystery book with like multiple points of view. I love it when like each chapter switches between all the different characters. I feel like it's the best way to build up this really like multi-layered story in a book like this. I just always really enjoy it. Some people really hate it, but I quite like it. And then we have Sadie by Courtney Summers. I must have read this around this time last year, and it has played on my mind ever since. It has been up there with probably one of my favourite books I have ever read, and that is saying something. As I'm saying this out loud, I'm coming to realise maybe this isn't so much a murder mystery. But you know what? I'm going to talk about it anyway. It is a murder mystery. It is. It's just not your classic type, perhaps. So this is the story of Sadie Hunter, whose younger sister Mattie is murdered, and Sadie goes off on a mission to find out why her sister was murdered, who did it, although I have a feeling she actually knows who did it, but you as the reader, you don't know who did it. So following Sadie on her mission to basically get revenge. Sadie's run away from her small hometown to basically get revenge for her sister's death, and nobody knows what's happened to her, so this radio producer or radio host called Wes McCrae is contacted, and he makes a podcast to basically figure out what's happened to Sadie. And so this book is it alternates chapters between Wes McCrae hosting his podcast, in which is very, very well written by Courtney Summers. It literally reads like a podcast. It's really clever. And he's sort of like piecing together what he knows from the clues that he's got. He's sort of like following Sadie on her journey, but he's always like 3-4 steps behind her. And then you jump to Sadie's point of view, where she is, like I said, 3-4 steps ahead. And so you're constantly sort of trying to fill in the gaps of what's kind of happened in those 3 or 4 steps. What's going on? What has Sadie learned? What has Wes McCrae sort of missed so far? And it's really well written. So Sadie clearly knows what she's doing. She's clearly on a mission, but you as the reader don't know, and nor does Wes McCrae. And you as the reader, you only know what Wes knows, if that makes sense. So in the most basic sense, this is a murder mystery. This is Sadie going off to avenge her sister's death, only she knows who the one responsible for the murder is. You don't. Fantastic book. It is so good. And then we have Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I couldn't get the pink cover. I really wanted the pink cover of this book, but I had to get the movie cover. I hate movie covers on books. I just don't like it. It's tacky to me. I wanted the classic pink cover, but they didn't have it anywhere. Everywhere I went had this one, so this is what I've got. This is one of my most recent reads. I'm sure everyone has read Where the Crawdads Sing by now. Everyone's probably seen the movie. I personally haven't yet. So this is the story of the marsh girl, or Kaya, and she basically was abandoned when she was a child, and she lives on her own in the marshes of North Carolina, and she's very othered by the people in the closest town. She's sort of seen as a weirdo and a freak because she lives in the marshes on her own. There's no like help. There's no, oh, let's feel sorry for the girl who got abandoned by her family and lives in the marshes. No, it's just like, she's a weirdo. Let's just like completely push her out of everywhere and just never interact with her. I mean, this is set in the late 1960s. So this is very much like 2 stories in one. It's very much a coming of age story of Kaya, the marsh girl, and her sort of like navigating through life, figuring out how to fit in society. Does she even want to? Her basically like growing up. You follow her from when she's like 6 years old, all like throughout her entire life. And then the other part of the story is the murder mystery. So a man from this local town called Chase is found dead, and Kaya gets sort of blamed for this murder, and it ends up going to trial. And I'm not going to spoil it and tell you what happens at trial, but it's sort of like a split perspective. So you sort of jump between chapters of Kaya as a child, or Kaya as she's like growing up, with chapters from like the police's point of view as they try and figure out who's responsible for this murder, but it's clearly like 20 years in the future. It's a murder mystery with a whole lot of other stuff to it. I can't say I particularly love this book in terms of the coming of age narrative. It's not that I didn't enjoy it, I just didn't feel like compelled to pick it up. I didn't like really care all that much, which maybe sounds really horrible, but I feel like it was just lacking something like compelling about it. However, when it really got into like the murder mystery bit, and it got into Kaya in her 20s and she's been accused of all this, that's when I really couldn't put it down. But I've heard other people say the opposite thing, and they didn't like the murder mystery element, but they really liked the coming of age thing. So I think it depends what your personal preferences are in books, but I did quite enjoy this, and the murder mystery, the twist in this is fantastic. We love a twist. And the final book I want to talk to you about is In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. Again, I don't have the physical copy to show you, so you'll see it on screen now. This is very similar to Hunting Party. It's a very, very similar kind of vibe. I probably should have talked about this earlier in the video, shouldn't I? So you haven't forgotten what I've said about the Hunting Party. But again, this is kind of like a locked room style mystery. It's a group of friends are in a cabin in the woods, and one of them ends up dying, and it's got to be one of the ones who are there. This time it's a group of women on a hen do in the woods, only the main character hasn't actually spoken to the bride or seen the bride in many, many years. So when she got invited to this hen do, she was like, what the hell, why have I been invited to this? But she decided to go anyway, because of course she does. And weird things have clearly gone on in the many years since they last saw each other, because it turns out that the groom is her ex-boyfriend. This book actually opens, or like one of the very early chapters is of the main character, Nina. Is she called Nina? It's basically her waking up in hospital, and she's trying to remember the story, like piece together what's happened over the last few days to make her end up where she's ended up. And it's clear that something very, very bad has happened, and people are trying to like prompt her to remember what happened and tell her side of the story. But she can't remember, and as she's sort of like telling the story out loud to you as the reader, she sort of begins to piece more and more bits together, and it's like a very slow puzzle being built, but I thought it was really cleverly told. Nora, I remember, she's called Nora, not Nina. So Nora's like telling you this story and piecing it all together, as you, the reader, are also piecing it together like alongside her. I just really, really enjoyed this. Again, I read this many years ago, so I don't know if now my opinion on it would be different, but sometimes you just don't want to reread books. Sometimes you just need to appreciate them for what they were at the time, and if you enjoyed it at the time, that's all that matters. You don't need to go back and see if you'll enjoy it again now. In this one, it's like high tensions, it's really, really tense, like the relationships between all the characters are clearly really tense from the get-go, coupled with the fact that you're in a woods in the middle of nowhere. It's really claustrophobic, and that just like adds this like overbearing sense of like something really, really bad has happened, or something really, really bad is going to happen. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Again, of course, I feel like I've said that about every book. I need to get better at these book videos, because a lot of the time I'm editing them and I'm like, yes, you said you like this one, of course you like it, because this is the list of your favourite books. Stop saying you like the books. Anyway, with that, I'm gonna go. Please let me know what your favourite murder mystery books are. I'm always on the hunt for new murder mystery books. I feel like I've read all of like the main ones, all of the big name ones, so whatever you got for me, throw it at me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.